When over-entitlement and corruption run rampant, it always inevitably disintegrates from within. With the NCAA now reeling, the Big Ten and SEC are running around in butt-hurt money-making mode, all because Greg Sankey has to get his Happy Gilmore on talking about his feelers hurt.
You are Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma State Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, y'all, and hello, all. Welcome back to Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily stop for all things Cowboy and Cowgirl related. My name is Cody Stovall. I want to thank you kindly for stopping by to make this your first listen. We're available on all of your podcasting platforms, visually as well on YouTube. Find me personally on X at AllDayOState. Today, we get to jump right off into the conversation that is, of course, permeating the airwaves, the TV stations. The SEC and Big Ten are once again at it. And this is absolutely crazy, but the benefit is now the Big 12, the ACC, the G5s, we're all at war together against the Big Ten and the SEC. Now, there's no disillusionment here, in my opinion. I feel like this is simply over the SEC being butthurt over Boise State and Arizona State getting automatic bids. Why are they so concerned about this automatic bid? Well, it's because it's an $8 million bonus if you make it to the second round. So if you get a first round bye, aka you get that $8 million, of course, that's what the SEC wants. And I think this does accentuate the fact that this is becoming more about dollar bills than what's best for student athletes, what's best for universities. It's darn sure not best for the fans. I mean, even if you wanted to go with the super conference situation, which is something that former NCAA president Mark Emmert had mentioned this previous year, he felt like eventually it would get to like the top 40, top 50-ish teams that were all predicated upon making over $100 million a year. So there's a cutoff line financially. That makes some sense. But if the SEC and the Big Ten are pushing this, it's obviously about money. And this is not necessarily pertaining as much for the Big Ten. I feel like this is primarily the SEC driving everything. And we all know that the SEC is in bed with the NCAA and the SEC is in bed with the ESPN. It's a massive cabal where they all work together. And of course, this could be pure conjecture, but I think if you look at some of the universities that have put on certain probations, even in basketball, right? KU was caught cheating. Memphis was caught cheating. LSU was caught cheating. Several schools out east were caught cheating. And none of them got any retribution out of the ordeal, except for Oklahoma State got banned from postseason play over a $300 infraction. That is just the NCAA picking and choosing. Same goes for SMU. Their death penalty sentence was absolutely preposterous because everybody in the country that had the dollar bills to do so were paying athletes and giving cars back then. Nothing has changed, except for now there could be potentially another third-party governing body, which is kind of ironic because Greg Sankey had mentioned that in the past, that the NCAA has lost a lot of their luster and all of the conferences could collectively hire a third-party entity with arbitration abilities that are secondary to that company. But it's much like the government, right? It's almost like the dirtier the individuals are, the bigger the potential corruption is. Those are the people that are crying foul the loudest. The individuals that are benefiting from all of the craziness and all the misappropriation of funds and the backdoor deals that are done, those are the people that are throwing the fits. Like the tampering situation, it could be mitigated by this new potential third-party governing body that kind of supplants some of the things that the NCAA used to do or supposed to do, but clearly they do not do. Of course, I'll believe that when I see it. But this is absolutely insane to me that we're even having this conversation. The SEC and the Big Ten want their own playoff. The SEC and the Big Ten want a bigger playoff. The SEC and the Big Ten want to continue to try to control everything from the narratives to the finances to the recruiting to how everything is conducted. This is pure desperation, and I think it's pretty obvious that the desperation is coming from certain levels of corruption. Precisely what has been happening over the last, 15, 20 years is the SEC is growing. The Big Ten is growing. They make so much money. You would think that this would be somewhat of a fallacy. And it's even more ridiculous because, again, the Big Ten, they've won the last two national titles. Last year, you could argue that Ohio State and Oregon were the two best teams in the country. So the SEC is losing a little bit of ground. And as it pertains to the Big 12 and the ACC, Arizona State should have beat Texas. And they got some help from some referees. Is that part of the corruption contribution? Likely not. But Texas is going to get favors. They always have. They always will. It is what it is. And they're in the SEC, so they're going to continue to get more benefits to being in this conference that is full of butthurt individuals that don't like the way things are going because they don't get to benefit from having all of this extra incentive to get to the second round, to get the first round buys. Now, do I think Boise State and Arizona State deserve the first round buys? Probably not. I would also make the argument that if you're any one of those four teams that got the first round bye, you don't want the first round bye ever again because they all lost, for starters. Secondarily, to me, the biggest part of the CFP changing that's been happening is the on-campus ball games. On-campus playoff games have to be one of the most absolutely magical things you could experience as a fan. Like if you've had season tickets or you just go sparingly to games, this is absolutely massive. And for all of the crap that we talked about SMU and to certain degrees the ACC last year, I think that they have proven that they're kind of in this mix as well. Now, do I think that they're on the same playing field as the Big 12? No, but they do have the flag bearers in the conference, like the Clemsons of the world. We do not have the blue blood flag carriers anymore, which is why somebody like Oklahoma State needs to bounce back this season and make waves, because you do kind of have to have, not necessarily a blue blood, but you have to have a team in the conference like the ACC does, typically with Clemson, that you can bank on being a massive part of huge runs, or even Florida State a couple years ago. You could talk about the fact that Florida State got left out after being undefeated as an absolute tragedy. I think that also accentuates, once again, that there are levels of corruption. There are levels of good old boy systems and doing favors. And my only concern about this potential new third-party governing body that has an additional layer of arbitration abilities from a legality perspective, I'll believe it when I see it, because unfortunately, again, just like politics, usually at some point in time, everybody gets a piece of being bought off to perform favors. And inevitably, it always typically comes crashing down because you cannot completely bypass paper trails and conversations and emails forever. This stuff comes out. And as we've seen recently with last year's basketball stuff with KU and Memphis and LSU and all those other teams, it doesn't matter, right? If you're in the cool kid club, according to the NCAA, the SEC, and the Big Ten, you're going to be fine. But if you're in the Big 12 or you're in the ACC or you're a G5, you better be ready because something's coming your way. This is obviously a massive flex because somebody is butthurt. I don't think it's the Big Ten. The Big Ten is the best conference in the country at the moment. The Big Ten makes the most money out of every conference in the country by a somewhat decent amount. So the SEC is playing catch up. And they also realize after watching what Arizona State did against Texas that the Big 12 is not that far behind. Of course, you're going to have your heavy hitters in the SEC, your Georgias, your Alabamas. Sometimes you're going to have teams like Tennessee that can pop up. You're going to have teams like LSU that are always going to be an issue. But outside of them, it's really a modge podge of somewhat decency. If you took the bottom half of the SEC or the bottom half of the Big 12, they would not finish in the top half of the Big 12. And I think that Greg Sankey is aware of that. His control is starting to slip away a little bit. Being the juggernaut that controls all things college football is changing. So I think this is his, attempt at trying to put things back in his control. Again, this seems very evident that this is all about money. This is all about trying to squeeze people out of the landscape so they can continue to load their rosters and they can continue to put up this fallacy that they are in charge of everything. It's not really a fallacy, though. They kind of are. And until the Big 12 does something about it, this is the landscape that we're going to find ourselves in. And unfortunately, basketball, the Big 12 has been the juggernaut that has ran college basketball for quite some time. This season, it actually is the SEC. So while the SEC might be going down a little bit in football, they seem to be excelling a little bit in basketball. So the argument for the Big 12 now has to be made, not only in the NCAA tournament, but football season as well. We have to chop down this tree. And we have to be willing to understand that this is a money grab. And there's people at the highest levels that are part of this. And those people, they care more about their status. They care more about their paychecks. They care more about those backdoor deals than they do about the success of SMU or Oklahoma State or Arizona State or Clemson or Florida State. They care about the cool kid club because it is a cabal where they collectively get to kind of run rampant and go against the rules and do the tampering. And they feel like they should be allowed to do that. As Brett Yormark had already said, there's no way that the Big 12, the ACC, and the G5 administrations that are part of these meetings, they're not going to vote on this. So the question becomes, how can the SEC and the Big 10 squeeze out the Big 12 and the ACC, especially with the NCAA, their homies, their buddies, their friends, being very insignificant at the moment? It's going to be extremely interesting to see how this whole thing progresses throughout the course of the season. Now, it does appear as though the playoffs are going to extend to like 14, 16 teams. I'm fine with that. I like the third-party entity that's going to run things on behalf of the NCAA, since the NCAA is a feckless entity that does nothing. But my only fear there is in the beginning, the third-party entity might be legitimate because they have talked about if they find tampering, that player will be suspended, and they'll have escalations that equal massive ramifications for the coaching staff if it continues to be a thing. That looks cool on paper. It seems cool in theory, but I'm sure at the beginning, the NCAA said the same thing. We're going to do this the right way. We're going to pay attention to academics and GPAs and where kids are excelling scholastically as well as on the field. And we're going to monitor that there is no craziness going around and people aren't handing out gold Trans Ams and bags full of cash. But they didn't do anything about it, except for when they could pick and choose to pretend that they still had some relevance, like Oklahoma State, like SMU. This is put a target on the Big 12 and the ACC's backs, and even to some degree, teams like Boise State. And Notre Dame is probably going to be swept up in this in some capacity. Could this be something that forces Notre Dame finally to just fully embrace the ACC? Because if Notre Dame's in the ACC alongside Clemson and Florida State, perhaps this argument is a little bit different. There is no argument right now that there is a stair-stepping status right now. And the Big 12 and the ACC are below the Big 10 and the SEC. But I think this is clearly indicative of Greg Sankey and the SEC realizing their grasp on controlling the narratives, the recruiting, the finances, the playoff, everything. It is starting to slip. And maybe they're okay with giving way to the Big 10 because they don't really have a choice, because Big 10 actually is in charge of college football at the moment. So they kind of have to work with the Big 10. And they have to respect the fact that the Big 10 makes more money than them. They do not have to like or respect the fact that Arizona State is knocking on the door of being better than Texas. They do not have to appreciate or understand that SMU is probably going to be a team that continues to matriculate upwards. Clemson, they look to be getting more involved in the transfer portal. Therefore, they could have the possibility of getting back on track. Same could be said for Florida State. But we have to make it happen. This season, Big 12 fans are ACC fans, and ACC fans are Big 12 fans, and we're all fans of the G5, because the target that's been put on our backs needs to be reciprocal for the SEC and the Big 10. We need to make life difficult, but we also have to win. That is the key, and unfortunately, that's the primary thing we haven't been doing. That's okay. We have time. We have time to get things figured out, but you might not have as much time as you want to do your taxes. That's why today our sponsor is Intuit TurboTax. Dealing with taxes and piles of paperwork is extremely frustrating. It can make you pull your hair out and turn gray all at the same time. Then on top of that, you have to wait and wonder and worry if you're going to get any money back. Are you going to owe? What's the situation going to look like? How can you plan your holidays predicated upon your taxes? taxes can be done easily, and you can easily upload the forms to TurboTax to get an expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who is backed by the latest technology with cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you'll also get real-time updates on their progress. And you can get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day as normal without all of the stress. No worrying, no waiting, no pulling your hair out and turning gray unnecessarily. This is tax season, and you can do it right with Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert today on TurboTax.com. This is only available with TurboTax Live Full Services, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Again, go to TurboTax.com to get rid of your stress and your worry and your anxiety with the money that obviously is important to you. All right, we need to shift gears here a little bit to some of the coaches in the Big 12 and how it shakes out. So this is going to have some mixture of historical connotations, but it's also going to be primarily based on the 2024 season entering 2025. And as it sits right now, we'll go from the worst to first. For me, number 16 has to be UCF's new coach, Scott Frost. Yes, I know they won a somewhat semblance of an undefeated half natty when he was there, but I also know that he completely derailed his entire career at Nebraska. He turned up to be a massive train wreck that had some problems off the field. He obviously was not very invested in recruiting because he let several of the top players in the state of Nebraska leave Nebraska, including somebody like Zane Flores, which is something that Matt Rule came in and talked about. We have to lock down the state. We've been ignoring the state for a little while. We've got to lock it down if we're going to have the opportunity to get back where we're supposed to be. I agree with him there, and I feel like Scott Frost, yes, this is an opportunity at redemption, and he did have a lot of success there, but that was before they were in the Big 12, and I do think that it's going to take him a little bit of time. So I got Scott Frost, number 15. Brent Brennan at Arizona. I mean, there's a few teams in this league that had so many NFL-level guys and so many returning starters that you would have thought that their seasons would have been somewhat magical. And I think Brent Brennan is the same. When you have the best receiver in the country and you also have Noah Fafita, you have a good complement of guys in the backfield, and you have a decent amount returning defensively, you should have been better. It was a down year. It was a bad year. It was a bad look. Hopefully they can rebound. They've had to get like 26 guys in the transfer portal, which has now become kind of normal. So we'll see if they'll be able to bounce back. But his previous stop, he was like 35-48. He did take him to a couple postseasons, which was a big deal. But that record is abysmal. So the fact that Arizona hired him is slightly concerning, especially after having one of your most talented rosters in a decade and completely pooping it away. Speaking of talented rosters, Rich Rodriguez I have here at number 14. Now, you could make the argument that he should be at the very bottom because he hasn't coached at this level in a little bit. He did just come from Jacksonville, and this is like a big Pat McAfee and donors push. I understand the nostalgic purposes behind it. I understand that he definitely has a big name, but you're seeing a lot of older coaches seemingly having difficulty adjusting to the transfer era and the NIL era and dealing with all of these agents and representatives and attorneys for high school kids now. It's madness. But it's going to be a lot for Rich Rod to adjust to. So I feel like 14 for him to begin the season is pretty fair. Number 13. Scott Satterfield. We had Scott at almost the very bottom of the list last year, but he did some things, and they obviously showed improvement. They had a few Big 12 W's that didn't really look like they were going to be even possible before the season started or even in the beginning of the season. And he had a really good transfer class that seemed to show out a little bit, and this is after losing most of the roster the previous year. So with everything he had to deal with, I feel like 13 here is pretty fair. Number 12, this is almost disappointing to say, but number 12 for me is Willie Fritz. I like Willie. I love what he did at Tulane. I love him being in the Big 12. I think his career is somewhat resembling Lance Leipold's. But that NIL money is going to be a problem. If you're only spending $2 million on NIL, that's going to be rough. And your roster isn't exactly the creme de la creme of the best players in the country. Now, they do have some very talented individuals. I think Chris proved last year to be a pretty adequate quarterback at this level. I think, obviously, Connor Wegman is still a big name that a lot of people think can do a lot of things. Of course, you've got Boogie, Stephon Johnson, over there taking an advanced role now as one of the top receivers. But I don't know if I'm completely buying Houston and Willie Fritz quite yet after the season they had last year and the amount of money they're not spending to acquire talent. Number 11, his homie, his buddy with a similar trajectory career-wise, Lance Leipold. Now, Lance Leipold should technically be higher, maybe, because of his track record, his success. Winning 9 games at KU is extremely difficult, if not borderline impossible, and he was able to do that. But I think last year showed that Andy Kotelnicki was the offensive coordinator that really made KU hum. Andy Kotelnicki made both Jason Bean and Jalen Daniels look like potential Heisman guys. They look like potential draft pick dudes. The offense in general was insane. You had Highshaw Jr. back there with Devin Neal, and they had a lot of talented wide receivers. Yet, here he finds himself. So I feel like he's down on this list. He did convince some guys to come back, so we'll see how it goes. But obviously, Andy Kotelnicki seemed to be the driver of the bus when they had their massive 9-win season. Number 10 on the list. If we're going to talk about the fact that Willie Fritz at Houston gets virtually $0 in NIL, now we got to talk about number 10, Joey McGuire, who is about to have more money than he knows what to do with in NIL because their version of Boone Pickens sold his company for like 4.1 or 5.1 billion with a B dollars, and he's the main individual pushing the NIL collectives they have going on in Red Raider Nation. So I think a lot of factors will equal Joey McGuire having success. Another one of those, if their quarterback play is healthy, that changes the game. You guys know how I feel about number 2 down in Lubbock, but his health has been the primary issue. If he stays healthy, this is a good team with a lot of talent and a lot of money to make some things happen. Number 9, Sonny Dykes. Thank you, sir, for Doug Meacham to some degree, and thank you also for Hoss Haney to some degree. And you know what? Sam Jackson was a former TCU quarterback, so we'll throw him in this equation as well. The reason we got Hoss Haney is because Josh Hoover had a pretty remarkable year. I think you could consider TCU season last year as a bounce back after a down year, but they're still trying to kind of figure out how to get back to the levels they were a couple years ago when they were playing for a national title. He holds some clout because of that, but there's been a little bit of a up and down with Sonny Dykes at TCU, so we'll see if he's able to respond. Number 8, an OG, triple OG, but I don't understand how he couldn't be anywhere but right in the middle. That's Kyle Whittingham. Yes, they won more games than Oklahoma State, I'm aware, but when you name a head coach in waiting and you're hanging on to the quarterback situation, much like Oklahoma State did with Alan Bowman, their inability to see past Cam Rising and see past some of the individuals they had on their roster was obviously an issue. And you could make the argument that both him and Mike Gundy are having some issues with the new landscape of college football, understanding how to navigate it and make it transferable to the field, which is why I have Kyle Whittingham at 8 here. I also have Mike Gundy at number 7. I know some of my Cowboy people are going to throw stuff at their screens and curse me out, but worst year of his career. Worst conference season since 1994. And the problem was there was no semblance of the ability to correct it or fix it or even the willingness to fix it or correct it. So just like Kyle Whittingham, you have to ask the question, is the game potentially, possibly starting to pass them by? Both Kyle Whittingham and Mike Gundy had the opportunity to kind of right some wrongs this year. Hopefully they're both able to do so. Number 6, I got Dave Aranda. Why? Because they had a bounce-back season last year. They looked really good. They went on a big stretch of winning ball games, and he did beat Mike Gundy and our Cowboys a couple years ago in the Big 12 title game. So he has that hanging over us as well. He was able to bring in some guys, retain some guys. They should have a pretty good ball club this upcoming season. Number 5, I have K-State's Chris Kleiman. It's kind of crazy that your fan base runs a quarterback out of Dodge because he's not good enough to be the starter and he's not good enough to start in the Big 12. And he goes to Ohio State and wins a national championship. But I do not blame the fan base for being all over Avery Johnson. I get it. I'm with it. But without DJ Giddens, this could be a little bit of a difficult proposition for K-State to get back where they feel like they should be. They got rid of individuals because they thought they had a Big 12 champion roster last year. Hopefully, Chris Kleiman can get him back on track this season. Number 4, Deion Sanders. He had a phenomenal season. He proved a lot of people wrong, including me, that you can do all of this with 55 transfers. It may not be the ideal scenario, but it is possible. It can be done. But he also carries a little bit of clout and a massive name, especially now that Travis Hunter just won the Heisman. So he's going to continue to get talent that a lot of teams in this conference kind of struggle to obtain. And the sky could be the limit for Deion. I do have some concerns with, I don't know, how he manages the locker room and things of that nature, but we'll see. Number 3, and I went back and forth here between Kalani and number 2, but I gave Kalani Sitake number 3. He didn't go get anybody in the transfer portal. They got like 5 people after a 5-win season. So many people, including myself, were like, dude, what are you doing? How do you have an abysmal year, especially by your standards, and then you not even try to go out and get anybody in the transfer portal? Well, turns out Kalani Sitake was right, and he knew he didn't need transfers because he was confident that he needed, or he had everything he needed on the roster already. He just needed to get it out of him. Number 2, Matt Campbell. How can you argue with that, right? He's been a mainstay at Iowa State, and for a long time, them winning 9 games was like the running joke. That was the peak of Iowa State football, was 9 wins. Well, he shattered that this previous season. And the year before, he dealt with the betting scandal and yelling at fans. And it seemed like he was possibly on the downhill slide, and he proved everybody wrong, which means number 1 is Kenny Dillingham. Why? Because he's young as all get out. He's only been doing this for 2 years. He's an Arizona guy that's locking down the state for the most part when it comes to recruiting, which is forcing the Arizona Wildcats to go out of their comfort zone, to go out of the state of Arizona for those reasons, plus what they were able to bring in the transfer portal. That Oda, that running back from Army, I think is going to slide in pretty seamlessly with what Cam Scadaboo was doing. All right. Speaking of, you know what? Actually, we're just gonna shift gears a little bit here to baseball, the frustration moment. This will be short, sweet, and to the point. Cowboy baseball is currently, I don't know, we're up and down, right? We beat top 10, top 15 teams, and we lose to teams that we shouldn't, much like Cowgirl softball. We have plenty of time to get it figured out. My frustration here is Josh Holliday seems to be having a Mike Gundy moment when it comes to Rob Walton, much like, for whatever reason, Mike Gundy refused or was unable to get rid of Casey Dunn, even though anybody with eyeballs and some knowledge of college football could tell that we had the most elementary, basic, bull honky offense in the Big 12 by far, one of the most elementary offenses in the country. And Mike Gundy refused to see it. Why? Well, maybe we'll find out in the book someday. But Rob Walton is going through the same ordeal. He's a phenomenal recruiter, right? He's a legend in the game. He can develop individual pitchers pretty good, which is why we keep having top draft picks year after year after year after year. It's the mound management that has been an issue for years with Rob Walton. It's not the talent. It's not the development. It's the inability to see when your pitchers are struggling. And that is mind-blowing to me because I know my pitchers, and I know when they're on. I know when they're off. I know when they're not hitting their spots. I know when certain pitches aren't working. And when all of that is happening and the team's getting hits or he's walking people, you make a move. Rob Walton just doesn't seem to have that ability to understand where his pitchers are struggling. And then there's also times where he does intentional walks that are kind of random, that don't make any sense. He also pulls pitchers sometimes when they're cruising and dealing. And there's not really a rhyme or reason to what Rob Walden is doing. And that's not the frustration. The frustration, much like with me on my Gundy, was how are you so blind that you can't see the Casey Dunn problem for years? It's the same thing with Josh Holliday. How are you so blind that you cannot see that you have a deficiency? He's your buddy. I get it. He is a legend who did legendary things at ORU. But his stubbornness has kind of been talked about, right? He's not willing to use some of the electronic laser-guided stuff or something to that effect. He's old school. I appreciate it. I like it. But as an old school dude, you should see, I don't know, even better when your pitchers are struggling and they're not hitting their spots. So it doesn't make sense. Now, the hitting, we could do an entire episode on that ridiculousness. And I'll tell you real quick, what I think the issue is we're too good at recruiting. The last time Josh Holliday led us to Omaha was with a small ball club. That was scrappy, right? A bunch of Donnie Waltons out there doing the daggone thing. We had pitchers that played multiple spots, that would hit and play the outfield and come in and pitch. We would piece things together. We hit a lot of line drives. We got a lot of singles. We had a lot of RBIs. It was a lot of small ball, laying down bunts, moving runners over. Then the staff got better. And then we brought in Matt Holliday. And now all of a sudden, if you're 6'6", 235 pounds, and you can hit 400 plus with 115 exit velocity, you were Cowboy material. And that's what we're seeing. We are still a banger bust ball club, which has been the difficulty the last few years. This is why we get beat out of regionals. We play other talented ball clubs that pay attention to small ball. They pay attention to small details. When runners are in scoring position, you do have to, directionally hit, as opposed to just swinging away to try to make something happen. So we're great without runners on. When we hit bombs all day, every day with 0 runners on. But when runners are on, we don't change our approach. We're still swinging for the fences 24/7. It seems to be the launch angle effect, the recruiting effect. Thank you, Matt Holliday, for giving us the ability to recruit these guys, to land these guys, and to shatter home run records. We appreciate it. But when you're also leading in strikeouts, and you're also the worst, or one of the worst, in leaving runners stranded, I guess Board of Regents might need to have a meeting with old Joshua Holliday. I would love nothing more than Josh Holliday to correct this. I would love nothing more than Josh Holliday to coach here for 35 years. I would love nothing more than Josh Holliday to be our next Gary Ward. But if he can't see what is somewhat obvious, even to people that are outside of Oklahoma State and outside of the Big 12, they'll even tell you it looks like you're just swinging for the fences every single batter, every single time up. Yeah, that's because that's what we're doing. That's precisely what we're doing. So we have major league talent. We've had like back-to-back top 10 recruiting classes. We've had back-to-back years of guys getting drafted in the first couple rounds, both hitters and pitchers and fielders. Yet we keep getting bounced out of regionals. So if we have the talent, we have the recruiting, we have the development, we have the arms, we have the bats, what's missing? It's an inability to adjust. And that usually starts at the top. Again, we saw it with football. Mike Gundy was either unable or unwilling to make the adjustments and fire people mid-season. I've never seen pitching coaches get fired mid-season, so I don't expect that to happen. But I do expect Josh Holliday to do his job and rein in his buddy. I think Josh Holliday's too afraid to rein in Rob Walton. And that's a Josh Holliday problem. That has now become a Cowboy fan baseball problem. But again, we have more than enough talent. So we can beat Tennessee. We can beat Texas A&M. We can beat Mississippi State. But we can also lose to Winthrop and Illinois State. It is what it is. Inconsistency this year has been wild. Anywho, that's all we're going to have for this one right here. As always, you know I love you. God bless. Go Pokes. Thank you for tuning in to make this your first listen here on Locked On Oklahoma State. You could be anywhere. So happy you choose to be here. Like it if you like the daggone thing. Dislike it if you don't. That's okay too. More importantly, share, comment, and subscribe. My podcast people out there. You're the bricks, the bread, the butter, the fountain, the fondue, the funny stuff, the funky stuff. You're all of it. You're what makes this thing click. Appreciate you. Do what you do. Hit the stars. Leave a review. All right, y'all. Later, taters.